In a high-stake geopolitical gambit, the Chinese Communist Party finds itself in a gradually unfavorable situation. Its ally, Russia, is currently on the brink of economic collapse, while Japan and South Korea, adversaries from the East, have forged a historic rapprochement, therefore bolstering their armaments. Concurrently, America has re-established 4 military bases in the Philippines, liberalized arms sales, and tightened its military alliance with Taiwan. In fact, a US-Taiwan trade agreement signed recently is almost like an Asia-Pacific equivalent to NATO, explicitly aimed at curbing China's aggression. Consequently, China finds itself in a passive position within the strategic landscape of the first island chain, resorting to a brinkmanship mindset. The CCP is in apparent disarray. On June 3rd, a Chinese naval vessel audaciously intersected the course of a US destroyer. If the US forces had been a little slow in responding, the prow of the American ship would have pierced the hull of the Chinese vessel, inflicting casualties on China's military personnel. This dangerous strategy is reflective of China's recent chain of proactive gestures. Notably, on May 26, a Chinese J-16 fighter challenged the American Air Force by intercepting a US RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft. Adding fuel to the fire, just 2 days ago, the Five Eyes Alliance and Microsoft exposed a cyber attack on Guam's infrastructure by the Chinese hacking group Volt Typhoon, which undoubtedly heightened tensions and even foreshadowed the possibility of war in the Taiwan Strait. This sequence of provocations has undeniably strained the CCP's image on the global stage. The US and Elite Security Summit in Singapore criticized the CCP's action and delivered a clear message to the defense minister of all participating Asian nations. There is no room for retreat in the face of the CCP's transgression in the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and the East China Sea. The US military has further issued a public warning of a potential conflict as early as spring 2025, a forecast that has gained consensus among several strategic analysts. Nevertheless, the final call to whether or not to attack Taiwan lies with Xi Jinping, thus rendering the situation even more precarious. This heightened tension is not solely manifest in the strategic decision of both parties, but is also reflected in their military deployments. In April, the People Liberation Army deployed the Shandong aircraft carrier to the eastern waters of Taiwan for drills, thereby exerting pressure on Taiwan. However, the maritime territories China can effectively control are gravely constrained. The Miyako Strait falls under the joint jurisdiction of Taiwan and Japan, while the Bashi Strait is controlled by Taiwan and the Philippines. U.S. ground troops and mobile forces stayed along the Ryukyu of Philippine Island, supplemented by submarines, patrol vessels, aircraft, and minefield present in the strait may pose substantial threat to the PLA Navy and Air Force. Confronted with this stark reality, the shortcomings in the CCP's military deployments have become more apparent. The PLA's diesel-powered aircraft carrier relies on accompanying supply ships. Hence, if these supply vessels are targeted, the carriers will be rendered immobile. The limited number and frequency of takeoff and landings of carrier-based aircraft constrain China's ability to undertake extended or large-scale operations. Moreover, all 3 of China's aircraft carriers are currently undergoing maintenance, implying the Chinese Navy's incapacity for any effective combat operations for at least 6 months. Despite the PLA's 055 class ship boasting of over 100 vertical launch system units and an array of defensive and offensive missile systems, it grapples with serious capability issues, thus reducing its combat efficiency. This has even led to a halt in the production of the 055 class destroyer. The CCP faces formidable obstacle even within its highly prized rocket force. Following Pelosi's departure from Taiwan and the previous year, the People's Liberation Army embarked on a series of extensive missile trials, hoping to flex its military might. However, a multitude of missiles failed to accurately strike their target, with some even straying into Japanese waters. These blunders cast a shadow over the accuracy of the PLA's navigation satellite system and prompted questions regarding the true capability of its military technology. Despite investing vast resources and time in amplifying military might, the returns the CCP had anticipated have not materialized. Economically and technologically pressured by Western powers, the CCP's strategy is now more like a desperate attempt to incite the domestic population to join the war against Taiwan. The effectiveness of this tactic remains to be seen, given the hardships experienced by mainland China's populace who exhibit no inclination towards conflict. According to a survey disseminated by the English version of Our China Story magazine, a mere 55% of participants backed the use of force to Taiwan's reunification, with 33% standing in opposition. Only 1% of individuals wish to initiate conflict. A social media post themed "Unwilling to fight for the country" has sparked anti-war sentiment within China's online communities. The author candidly stated, "In the event of war, neither I nor my children will fight. We, the underprivileged, are often forgotten, remembered only in times of national crisis. Those who desire conflict can proceed. I will not go, and neither will I let my children." Despite the swift deletion of this post, the resonance it found among netizens is ineradicable. Over 2,000 comments and more than 8,000 likes suffice to confirm these netizens' heartfelt sentiments. Comments are brimming with cynicism about war, such as "war only serves to protect the affluence of the wealthy. Let the rich wage their own wars. Those who instigate and advocate for war are the true culprits, and let those experts bear the brunt. They are well versed in coping strategies." Comments also savagely critique the corruption rampant among Chinese government officials. Why should we sacrifice ourselves for senior officials whose family are reaping benefits in the US? I will not go. Let the leaders and their children lead the charge. Their red genes will be more belligerent. Some people have sought to further clarify their position by invoking Western parallels, most notably the privileged class of British society, such as the aristocracy. Held in a higher social and moral regard, those noble adheres to the principle of honor above all else, consistently leading the charge in times of conflict. In fact, during the First World War, British aristocratic officers suffered a higher casualty rate than ordinary soldiers. Analysts sifting through these discourse point out that despite China's harsh censorship, public sentiment against war continued to be a powerful undercurrent in the digital realm. This suggests that the endurance of grassroots citizens has reached a critical point. Chinese youth advocate Wang Zhongyi draws attention to Taiwan as a singular beacon of democracy within the Chinese-speaking world. Its existence substantiates the political of the Chinese populace to achieve democratic governance, which represents an existential threat to the CCP. As such, the Chinese government would prefer to obliterate Taiwan rather than incorporate it into its dominion. Wang advocates for a strategic recalibration in Taiwan, urging it to articulate to the CCP that should they dare provoke a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, we will retaliate, carrying the flames of conflict to your doorstep and liberating the mainland people. The scenario the CCP fear the most is Taiwan launching a counteroffensive. Although the Chinese populace is currently reluctant to participate in the CCP's aggressive campaigns, should the objective of conflict shift to eradicating the Communist Party, the number of willing combatants would rise significantly, potentially extending to the active military ranks of the CCP itself. Significance of the First Island Chain. The First Island Chain, conceived during the Cold War, served as a defensive front against Soviet influence in East and Southeast Asia, with Taiwan as its central, crucial component. Turning our focus back to the point of conflict between China and the US, we must recognize that the root of the issue extends beyond Taiwan to the broader struggle for Pacific dominance. From a strategic survival perspective, the necessity of the US to retain control over the Pacific far outweighs that of China. China has alternative options for energy imports via terrestrial routes through Europe or from Russia and Central Asia, and can maintain reasonable self-sustainability without breaching the First Island Chain. Conversely, the US must preserve a vast Pacific defense line due to its lack of territorial depth comparable to the Eurasian mainland. A Chinese military advance as far as Hawaii would subject the U.S. homeland to direct threats. Therefore, any attempt by China to enter the Pacific is a sign of threat to the U.S. Su Ziyun, a scholar at Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research, suggests that the first island chain issue on the surface is the CCP's transition from land to sea power, but fundamentally is a conflict between communism and democracy. The first island chain extends from the northern Kuro Island southwards through the Japanese mainland, followed by the Ryukyu Island and the Philippines, the Greater Sunda Islands, and ends at Borneo Island in Indonesia, delineating the boundaries between Eurasian and Pacific tectonic plates. The second island chain includes the Izu Island, Bonin Islands, Volcano Islands, Marina Islands, Guam, Yap Island, Paula Islands, and Harajima, which is a more broken up barrier and thus offering less resistance to China's submarines and fleet. As for the third island chain, it begins at the northern end in Alaska, passes through the Hawaiian Islands, extends to some U.S. Pacific islands, and finally reaches key U.S. allies Australia and New Zealand. This chain consists of only a few reefs and small islands, making it an ineffective defensive line. Therefore, the US focuses its defense on the first island chain. However, there are two main gaps in the first island chain, located in the north at South Korea and in the south in the Philippines. The US strategy to address these gaps is through alliance and partnerships. At the end of April, President Biden reached an agreement with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol in Washington, D.C., agreeing to deploy U.S. nuclear submarines in South Korea. Additionally, leaders from Japan and South Korea met in Seoul to mend their historically tense diplomatic relationship and deepen military diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific region. Simultaneously, U.S. troops were stationed at 4 military bases in the Philippines to more directly monitor the Taiwan Strait and the disputed areas in the South China Sea. At the closest point to Taiwan, Basco Island in the middle of the Bashi Channel, the Philippines Marine Corps is equipped with India's BrahMos supersonic anti-ship missiles and the US's HIMARS missile launchers. They, along with Taiwan's Chongfeng missiles, can block the Bashi Channel, preventing the Chinese Navy from entering the waters east of Taiwan. In the south of the Philippines, the U.S. military has returned to the base evacuated after the 1991 eruption of the Mount Pinatubo, significantly enhancing their operational speed in the disputed South China Sea areas. In the first island chain, Taiwan occupies a critically strategic position. If Taiwan were to fall into the hands of the CCP, the defensive line of the first island chain would be utterly compromised, forcing the U.S. to retreat to Guam and making defense considerably more challenging. This is an outcome Washington cannot accept. Hence, if Beijing opts to resolve the China issue by force, the U.S. will inevitably intervene to protect Taiwan. The recent U.S. deployments and joint operations along the island chain aim primarily to prevent China from stationing troops east of Taiwan. This area is highly sensitive. If the PLA were able to establish a permanent presence there, it would effectively seal off all maritime traffic to Taiwan. Taiwanese public confidence in their defense could wane, and Beijing could manipulate Taiwanese public opinion, coercing Taiwan into unification. In response to the situation, Taiwan has successfully developed the extended-range Chongfeng 2 and Chongfeng 3 anti-ship missiles and purchased shore-based Harpoon anti-ship missiles from the U.S. The U.S., Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines are working to establish a Common Operational Picture, COP, or Common Tactical Picture, CTP, by improving their interoperability, obstructing PLA naval and air forces from breaching the first island chain. To deter China from instigating conflict with Taiwan, the United States and its allies are strategically orchestrating maneuvers to divert China's military forces and resources across numerous fronts. A recent testament to this effort is the joint exercise undertaken by the US and India at the Kalaikunda Air Force Base. In an unprecedented show of strength, the formidable B-1B bomber made its first appearance, indicating the U.S. military's readiness to stage offensive from the southern flank of China. This raises compelling questions about the PLA's ability to maintain a focused military campaign in Taiwan amidst potential threats from other sides. Taking in its entirety, Taiwan's role in this strategic threat cannot be understated. It stands as a pivotal chess piece in the United States and China's high-stake power tussle of Pacific dominance. As the world casts its gaze into the future, it is increasingly apparent that the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea will retain their status as global strategic hotspots.